AmaXhosa, and those who did not convert remained AmaXaba. So it created these two kinds of African people. Now, then even the majority of people who were then converted based on Methodist approaches, they became AmaWesleyan. And those who were converted on the approaches of Anglican, they became Anglicans. And then there were others who Dr. Jessup was talking about, the Moravians, sustenance, the land. And they use areas of their spirituality. So they must run constantly to go and look for places where they could express themselves, feed, get.
Mashiane politically incorrect. The last time I spoke to Malcolm X, I called Thandulwe to Malcolm X because, like I said in the previous podcast, he carries a very special name in my. I love Malcolm X. I love Malcolm X. So I call him Malcolm X because he took the Al-Shabaab name. Thandulwe, you saw my podcast that I did with Ubaba. I want Jasop.
Yes.
Yeah, it's called Jasop. It's very difficult. Is that a common name in the Cape?
In the Cape, yeah. Bakono or Jasop. Yeah, it is.
It is. Okay, yeah. You are. Do I call you a scholar, a historian, a lover and follower of everything Pan-Africanism?
Mm.
Is it a correct characterization of your character?
Maybe I'm all of those things, and many others.
Yes.
It makes life easy to be many things at the same time.
Yeah. Ntate Jasop spoke about the BULHOEK massacre. Mm. And like you know, I want us to get into the thick of things. Let's start discussing it right away because this is what I like. You saw it and you said, Mashiane, let's unpack this further because when I spoke to him, it wasn't about that.
I see.
It was about the route that they used going to exile. But you can start it anywhere.
Anywhere.
Yeah.
No, thanks, Mashiane.
Maybe also for the record, maybe those who have not seen the podcast, just tell them why you are interested in this. What is your political grounding, your professional grounding as well, so they follow up. Thanks.
Okay. As I say, ndiyabulela kakhulu ku politically incorrect for inviting me. Igama lami nguThandulwe kaDlanga. Ndingumuntu ngwauye ngwayimali ndima kaNkumbuso. I try to read on history, philosophy, and political sciences. And I'm very much interested in these ideas of African people and how the history of African people has been communicated. But also at the same time, I have been fortunate or unfortunate that I was raised in the church AmaXhosa, which is where the people were involved in the BULHOEK massacre moment. So I'm one of the generations of those people who suffered the killing. And what was interesting with me on the conversation that you had, I felt like what is nice about ukuthetha, because in our language you always say ukuthetha kuzala okunye ukuthetha. So talking breeds some more talking, or conversation breeds more conversations. And when I heard Utatu Jasupu talking about AmaXhosa and the BULHOEK massacre, and I felt like, okay, this is something that we can further engage, because you felt like it is not something that is prominently known, especially in the north of the country.
Yes.
Yeah. So I guess that's one of the reasons why I thought let us have this conversation. I'm closely associated with the massacre because it's at home. So I'm closely there. But there are two things that I use when I talk about it and when I engage it scholarly. I try to be provide a scholarship approach, but also without losing its essence as how it was experienced by the people who experienced it and how they communicated it to us. So that's why my scholarship on it must have that experience of the people who suffered that. So what I'm going to do in this conversation is that I'll try and take three elements. One, the moment of the BULHOEK massacre, which occurred on that day, is as a result of many moments that lead up to that moment. So there are many things that are occurring before 1921, the 24th of May, 12 o'clock. Before that moment, there were other moments that led up to that. But also, too, the experiences that were shared with us as children of that church also had. I'm going to try and share that historical archive. And thirdly, I will try to just give an interpretation. Maybe I might do these things at the same time, or I might separate them. If I don't separate them, please understand them, and your viewers understand them that I'm using that approach. But what is BULHOEK massacre? When did it occur? What was the reasons? Now, the BULHOEK massacre, for me, it does not only mean it's a massacre. It is a moment. That moment occurred on the 24th of May, 1921. I think now we're about 21, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's 104th year. They commemorated the 104th year this year of that moment. And I was there to go and commemorate as well. It was the colonial police who were then brought into Ntabelanga. Now Ntabelanga is they call it the mountain of the sun, and where there is that place, there is a place called BULHOEK. Now the area is called BULHOEK because of the location of that rural area, that village. So the area is called BULHOEK. So it's more Afrikaans, like BULHOEK. So the hook is a honor, and the bell or the bull.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it occurred there, and on that morning, there were about over 200 people who were killed, and those a large number of others were injured, and then mainly women and children were then displaced. Now, where is BULHOEK, or where is Ntabelanga? Ntabelanga is located in about 32 kilometers away from what we used to know as Queenstown, that is Koman. So when people were displaced from there, they were then displaced in Koman. Now, who is displaced there? It is the women and children, which is a story that I'm really interested in working out in a scholarship to think about BULHOEK massacre after the BULHOEK massacre. So the implications of that from the 25th of May 1921 going forward. Now, the occurrence of the BULHOEK massacre have got a context. It is as early as one can state, with the arrival of the European settlers in our country, the country called South Africa. Now, around the 1820s, I'm taking it there for the purposes of time. Around the 1820s, there was the arrival of the European settlers in the Eastern Cape, which they had fundamentally what is called the Methodicism. So they introduced the European Christianity, which then converted the majority of people, to the Africans, to lose their traditional ways. And some of the things that were then produced in that process was the creation of a dichotomous perspective of people. So those who converted became the converts, AmaXhosa, and those who did not convert remained AmaXhosa. So it created these two kinds of African people. Now, then even the majority of people who were then converted based on Methodist approaches, they became AmaWesleyan. And those who were converted on the approaches of Anglican, they became Anglicans. And then there were others who Dr. Jessup was talking about, the Moravians. Now, this arrival of the European settlers in that part of the world had, for many years, various troubles. One of the troubles was that it took away the land, but also it distracted the identity of these African people. Now, as time goes on, the Africans get suffocated into these dimensions, physically, in the land aspect. They can't, because the Europeans are taking over, they're colonizing the land. But also at the same time, the Europeans are colonizing the deity called God. So God for them is must be white, God is European, and they're also colonizing the way of worship. You worship on a Sunday, and you worship in these forms, and your worship must follow these precisions. Now, in the process, you might remember, Africans have got their own ways of gifts. And one of them is this thing of different prophecies or prophesying. So you would have different kinds of people who are gifted spiritually. Now, because of the arrival of the Europeanism, it then gives an idea that the Africans' ways of spirituality and of worship are not proper. That is why then they must be converted to a European Christendom, because it's a particular culture that they must then accept. It then leads you to have the dimensions of saying the story of MGijima in a way, where white people introduced the idea that MGijima prophesied and said they must kill the cattle, and then the cattle must then the Africans are going to be saved by the Christianity. So white people actually saved or civilized Africans away from their backwardness through the conversion of MGijima and all of that, those stories. But there is, maybe to digress here, but there is a contestation of that narrative that says, basically, there was the prophecy, if it was there, something like there could be no evidence or something, but the killing of the cattle did not emanate as a result of a prophecy, but it was a result of a lung sickness, the cow lung sickness. So the AmaXhosa used their agency because they were able to identify and observe that there's a problem with these animals. So the best thing is, let's kill them, because if we keep them, they infect others, and then our livelihood would die. So they would then eliminate those. So there's this that comes with the European Christendom within the African people, and it creates two kinds of people. And I think then my family would then form part of that. But what is strange is that at the very same time, while people are converted to become AmaXhosa, you then find others who are converted on Sunday, but during the week, they are utilizing their ordinary and traditional spiritual religious approaches. Now, I call those people, as a person who does scholarship on these things, I call them AmaXhosa. So they are two things in one. That's why earlier when you were trying to compartmentalize me, I was like, maybe I can be many of those things at the same time.
True.
So there's this now problem of an annexation of the land, annexation of spirituality, annexation of God, this colonization of land, colonization of what it means to be a human, colonization of religion. So everything that the Europeans then are fascinated with, even to this day, they are so fascinated about oneness. Everything must be one. We must be the superpower. You must have one wife. You must have one God. You must have everything that you must have one kind of democracy. You must have everything is about one God, one baptism, and all that jazz. You understand? So they bring this dimension to say we must contest these people. They can't. We must then civilize them. Oneness. So there must be one way of knowing, one way of worshiping. Now, what this does to the majority of the Africans in that area is that now Africans lose areas of sustenance, the land, and they use areas of their spirituality. So they must run constantly to go and look for places where they could express themselves, feed, get land, and so on and so forth. Now, some of the Africans, they end up in the case of Mgjima and his family and his children and his wives and all of those, they end up in what is called Stone location. Now, Stone location is designed, I'm trying to move fast, is designed in a way that you can see some kind of civilization, if one were to say. So that European thinking, it has got streets. So when people are moving the streets, there's lines, things are designed like that. And the reason why it is designed like that is because the area is covered with a large number of European settlers' farms. So these settlers' farms, they rely on the indigenous people as a labor force. So you would have to have then some kind of a civilization. Now, there in that area, you then had majority of people converted to Methodism or Wesleyan Methodism. And Mgjima and his family falls into that category, like Robert Sobukwe, who then also falls into that category because of the location, the area with which they are at. So then they accept this religious norm of European Christendom under Wesley Methodist. But with his brothers, now I'm talking to the Mgjima specific because he's the leader in the story. His brothers go to school and they go to Lovedale. At the time, there were these specific schools that were an important schools for Africans. So his brothers go to school, and we are told in the historiography of the church is that he could not, because every time he would attend, he would be attacked by severe migraine headaches. Then he ended up being a non-educated in the sense of missionary education. So the system for him did not make him an educated person, but his brothers were, who then later become his lieutenants when he leads this church. So they never left him, so some of his brothers, especially the older one. Now, this then means that now, Enoch Mgijima will remain at home. He grows up and he becomes an ordinary person, some kind of a peasant at home. and joins, he becomes we call them lay preachers in Wesleyan Methodist. He does that all the time. But at some point, he gets to be engulfed with a particular spirit that then goes against his understanding, or his Christianity in the Wesleyan Methodist, leading him to be expelled in the Wesleyan Methodist. The thing, I haven't seen a letter of expulsion of Mgjima in the church, but we know that around that period when the Africans were constantly complaining about a large number of things, especially in the beginning of the 1900s, complaining about a large number of things in the white church, which is the European Christian church. One, superintendents are white, but they don't stay here and they don't preach to these people. Two, they control the money and everything that is engaged in this church. But when, as an African, you remain here, you evangelize, but then you remain subservient because God cannot be expressive on you because you are an African. So God is only expressive through a European, which is now, they call them white people. So then Mgjima breaks away from this Wesleyan Methodist Church, and he begins to engage on things that looks more prophetic. He would say things, he would do things, and he then gains a large number of following. Now, in this large number of following, especially around the 1902, 5, 7, he's got this thing that is going, and people see him now as an important figure. Now, at the same time, this, I'm saying it is spiritual, but Africans are struggling physically because of the annexation of land. And the 1900s bring you this unity between the Dutch and the British, who unite to ensure that we are going to subjugate these people here so that we take over this country, and then later they would call it South Africa. So people are struggling physically, but also at the same time, there's a person who comes with a spiritual dimension. When he brings this spiritual dimension, people follow. By 1910, Mgjima then meets a guy from, they call him, I think Peter Machaga. Yeah. Now, Peter Machaga is a member of our church, the mother church, which is the Church of God and Saints of Christ. He's from Utenek, Kariga now. And then they meet Mgjima, they converse, and then Mgjima gets converted into the now an institutional organization outside of Wesley. So he gets converted to another organization, which is a church organization. This organization then propels him, because it is now more organized by 1910. It propels him to be able to say, this is what I was looking for in the Mgjima's thinking. So this is what we are told. But by 1913, Mgjima has a disagreement with people of the very same institution that he had joined. You understand? So then there is a further, I don't know whether to put it as a split or something, but they then split. One group remains with Mgjima, and others say, no, this Mgjima man is a problem. So this happens around 1916. Now, these people who are remaining with Mgjima, they believe in this man, and they believe in his teachings and these prophetic things. Then they begin to build a community. Now, this is important because what you see in Mgjima's doing, you can compare it to what was happening in the Garveyite movement, where Marcus Garvey was developing a society of independent African men and women and families that would depend on themselves for development. And this is not only happening here, it has happened in other societies in the Americas. So the influence that you see in Mgjima is there in the government movement, and you also see it in William Saunders Crowdy, who then was the leader of the same church that Mgjima was in, but in the Americas. Then there's this development of this contestation now, because remember, 1913 Land Act is put in place. Now it certifies the annexation and the dispossession of the African people now by law as a country. Oh. Now, here you've had people who have been struggling with the land question for some time. And Mgjima, when he organized these people, where is he going to organize them? Not in the sky, not on top of a roof. So there must be a particular place that they are going to meet. So that's where now the contestation comes in. Because when he organizes these people, the now new South African government of 10, which has adopted this land, sees these Africans as being rebellious. Mgjima preaches these people. So by 1916, Mgjima has organized his church with his followers, and immediately after he gets excommunicated by the mother church, which is now the Church of God and Saints of Christ, they begin to call themselves Israelites, so AmaXhosa. And Mgjima's messaging grows far and wide. I mean, I know that all these occurrences are happening in what is now called the Eastern Cape, in the Cape Colony. But Mgjima's messaging expands to include people from Northern Transvaal. I mean, when I say Northern Transvaal, Pietersburg and beyond, even beyond Pietersburg was even called Pietersburg. One of the examples is that there's one person who is recorded as been killed at the BULHOEK massacre moment from Gampahlele. There are also other people who had then heard and gotten the message of Enoch Mgijima around the issue of contestation, the philosophical contestation, and also the physical contestation of what European Christendom was bringing towards them, the Africans. By 1919, Mgjima has gotten a great number of following. People who are there in Ntabelanga from different places, they have left their homes for various reasons to come and stay with this man because they believe that he is really the man of God. 1918, 1919, there is a COVID kind of a sickness, which then leads Mgjima to say, you need to hide under the hand of God so that you don't get killed by this. And one of the things that he introduces is the white painting of the houses of the members of his followers. Now, up until this day, his followers have many of their houses are painted in white. Even their church buildings, they are painted in white because of it seems like it was communicating those elements. Now, you would remember that I said part of Mgjima's liturgy, I think that's what they call it in
theology.
In theology. Part of his liturgy, it revolves around the issue of salvation cannot occur in the sky. It must occur at a specific place. And for him, Ntabelanga, which is now in Kamastone, is that place. Now, when these white people complain about Mgjima, Mgjima then keeps on saying, but I did not call any person here. I am asked by God to preach, and I'm preaching, and I'm doing that, and we're then developing our people as a society. 1919, the pressures start. 1920, a clear contestation between Mgjima and AmaXhosa and the government then is very clear. The government then sends various types of people, prominent Africans, to Mgjima. And one of those was Dr. Jabaf, a prominent intellectual of the time. And Mgjima says to them, okay, if these people you say, I call them here, go to them and ask each and every one of them if I did call them here. If a person is called by me, they must go. And also there is a proposal that is brought by these intellectuals to Mgjima that, no man, you see, take these men, they can, they so that they don't get arrested and they don't get killed, so that they can go and work in the mines, so that all of this problem is averted. Now Mgjima says to them, I don't preach for the mines. I preach for the kingdom of God. So these guys leave. And then AmaXhosa would then refer to these ones, so they would then refer to them as they were the spies of the government, like all the other spies that were also sent there. Now, when Mgjima realizes that there's really a confrontation and that the colonial government now has brought in the police, the colonial police and the colonial army, Mgjima then begins to develop regiments. Now these regiments, he says, okay, you can come and take these people that you are going to, but you are not going to take them while we are here. We are not going to sit and wait. But also at the same time, you can come and say, you are going to kill us. Don't think that we are just going to sit and be passive, because we believe that God can fight for us. But God cannot fight only if we do not fight as well. It is for this reason that I always look at the BULHOEK massacre not as a massacring of African people in a passive, arms folded situation, but they were fighting. But the difference is that they were fighting using knobkerries against a military might that was carrying guns. Now, on the day in question, not on the day in question, the previous day, which is now the 20th, after all these contestations that have been taking place, there's letters, Mgjima is writing to the government, and the government is writing back, to a point that the government said to Mgjima, now we're tired of talking, we're coming. And we're going to do what we do best. Now, listen to this language. You see this language, you might have seen this language or might have heard it in 2012 in the issue of the American. So I got the land. So that's also that kind of language that came to those letters to say, we're coming, we're tired of talking to you. Because for that matter, you are disregarding the crown.
Concomitant action.
Yes, concomitant.
Concomitant.
So they're bringing that kind of a language to Mgjima. And AmaXhosa is saying, okay, you can come. Then they begin to develop themselves as regiments, and now they contest and control who comes into the city and who doesn't come in. They've got at the gate men who then become the security guards, who will then check who is in, who is out, who's coming in, who's not coming in. Now, from Queenstown, the previous day, a large contingent of military might comes in to come and deal with this rebellion now. And this rebellion is twofold, and I'm saying it deliberately. It is philosophical or religious and spiritual, but also it is also physical. So all of these things, they move together, and I love this. That's why I once said I'm a Sobukoist. I love how these Israeli contest this, because I see it later in late 1950s when Robert Sobukwe talks about what is politics to us as Africans. He says they're about the spiritual and the physical interest of the African. Now you see this dimension between Mgjima as well, that he deals with the spiritual element and also the physical interest of the African. So this thing, it was then carried over through in the Sobukwe's political discourse. Now, European soldiers come in on this day, and the previous evening before the 24th of May, and then on the day in question, which is the 24th of May, the morning, Enoch Mgijima organizes these regiments, and he gives them, he says they must wear a particular clothing. There's a particular clothing that AmaXhosa wear during Passover. He calls it the regalia of the blood. That's what it is called. So it's like the short skirts with sweats and belts, and it's like it looks more Scottish if you look at it. You must just check them on the social media. They do. So he asks them to wear that, all men. Now then he puts different regiments, older people's regiments, younger people's regiments, middle-aged, and then old men. He then puts them to say, you are not going to fight. Women, you are not going to fight. Children, you are not going to fight. The morning starts with a clear intention that there's going to be a physical confrontation between the colonial government's security force and the armies of AmaXhosa. But this contestation is going to happen. Here is the firepower. Here is the Nobkeris. By 12, there was a discussion through the day. By 12, it was clear that they are not going to agree. The church historiography says that Enoch Mgijima stood on top of the mountain wearing a red robe, long red robe on top of the mountain, operating like a
orchestra.
Chief commander. But then there was a general of these regiments, which was his brother. His brother's name was Charles Mgjima. So he was his older brother. His older brother became the general commanding of these regiments. And right through, so he would drive around and he would ride around on horseback, engaging the regiments.
Yes.
And the church historiography says when Mgjima wore the red robe and stood on top of the mountain with older men who were his lieutenants, they say he said, I want them to see me clearly, so that if they want to deal with me through their guns, they should. 12 o'clock, they say they went into a church, because 12 o'clock is a time for prayer in the church. They went to pray, and just immediately after that, there was a sound. I don't know what kind of a sound, but then that sound led to a firing, where the colonial soldiers began to fire, and these men charging. Again, I'm saying to you, listen to this thing, this firing. You remember 2012, Marikan, there was a sound. There was a shot that was made. Whoever shot it, it seems like that it triggered the firing, and AmaXhosa were then shot flat. With there was a gun called I think it was established in 1890 something. It was a Maxim, that gun. So they were shot dead.
AK-47 of the time.
So they were shot dead at that time. Remember, women are in the main tent, and old men. When after some time, when the bullets have subsided, AmaXhosa went out, those who had been injured and others, with a white flag and said, "No, we just want to tend to our people. We want to tend to them. So it's a white flag. Wait a bit. We tend to our people, but we are going to fight again." But then they realized that the majority of their fighting power was then depleted in a number of ways. Now, after this, women were not killed, but there were young men who were young, that were also killed on the other side. And now what then transpired was every time when these colonial soldiers were assessing who is still alive, remember they had those long bayonets and guns, so they and kill them. So there's a guy specific that was they were looking for, because he had a confrontation with the law a few years ago with his two comrades. That means his two colleagues from AmaXhosa. Then the police wanted to arrest him a few years ago. They could not because AmaXhosa were protecting.
Found refuge there.
Yeah, he said, the AmaXhosa said, come and get him. You are not going to get him here because now we have created a refuge and a liberated zone. So they asked him, as he was injured, they asked him, the name of the guy was Philip Motlaban. So Kimugwen.
Yes.
Again, can you see that
the reach?
The reach of Mgijima's messaging. So they found him there and they asked him, are you Philip Motlaban? He said, yes, I am. And that's how he died. He died through that, even though he was injured at the time. My father's great grandfather was also injured there. He was injured, and throughout his life, he lived with those bullets of that moment.
Ish.
Throughout his life, he lived with those. And some people were then seriously injured. They lived. There's a story of a person lived right through their lives. They were like they had Parkinson's, but it was because of those bullets. Now, in the aftermath of that, there was a guy who then remained. They asked him. He's a Kwazela. His surname is Kwazel. They asked him, "Are you a minister?" He said, "Yes." Okay, you are going to bury your people. Dig. They said to them, "You must dig." They dig a big hole, and they buried them in that mass grave. These ones, and he says, when he tells the story, he says, "I had to pack them. My comrades, whom about an hour earlier we were together. I was with them, but now I had to pack them. And once I was done, they said, pray. And then I prayed. And also on the other side of that area, it's a heritage site, there's also another grave site. Now, before I move from this point, is AmaXhosa are buried now in this mass grave. Ne? And through their life and the contestation of colonial government, they said, we don't want you in the land of the crown. But can you see now, when they are buried, they are buried in the land of the crown. So they actually won that that fight, but they won it dead.
Yes,
in a way, because that place of contest, which was the colonial land, became their place of burial.
Yeah,
and we look at it in that sense. Now, women were then dispersed to Komani and their children, and they then began to live a life of destitute. And those other men who were there were then arrested. Enoch Mgijima was also arrested with his brothers, and his brother died in a prison that was in Kimberley, because they were sentenced to Kimberley as I choose number 1, I choose number 2.
Kimberley, Northern Cape.
Northern Cape, yes. So there was a big prison there on the Tutoitspan Street. That we call it. There's a street there called Tutoitspan Street. So there was a prison. So they were then sentenced to 3 years there. Again, this thing is not new. It's said 3 years hard labor. You see it after the 1960 Sharpeville massacre. Again, there's those dimensions of people who get to be sentenced to 1 year, 6 months, 18 months, 3 years. So the number one culprit in that instance was given 3 years. Now, Mgjima, 1960, Robert Sobukwe is given 3 years. So you can see the continuation of this historical violence of the colonial logic. Women were then dispersed and their children. They ended up now in Komani. When they get there, people were standing on the roads. Komani was a South African town, which is it was mainly occupied by white people. They were celebrating that these Africans who were barbaric and who were being misled by these men, now they have been dealt with. You read in the news of those times and how they were being interpreted. But at the end of it all, they ended up, most of them, in Komani. And there were some people who then went back home. So their records are not known. There are some people who then gave up because their husbands died there. So they had to go home, and when they went home, they were asked, but you left with your husband, where is it? So you child your husband wherever. Like there were those dynamics.
It was a calamity.
Yeah, but later then, these people who were then living in destitute in Komani and other areas, then began to rebuild themselves. 28, Mgjima, 21, 3 years later, Mgjima is released, and then they began to rebuild their lives. Now, here, if you think about the BULHOEK massacre and AmaXhosa, it is a very deep conversation. But the unfortunate thing is that because of colonial and apartheid logic, the only and the first person who was able to do a thorough research on the BULHOEK massacre is Professor Robert Edgar. Professor Robert Edgar, by the way, we are going to be having a conference to celebrate him at the University of Free State in October. So he was the first person who began to write on the history of AmaXhosa. I think it was in 1976, 1977. His PhD was on that story. So he became some kind of an authority in the history of AmaXhosa.
Yes.
Only through him that then the story began to be interrogated. But again, there were limitations because he was a white person. So some of the experiences of might have been missed, but I'm not saying he did not do a good job, but there are elements with which now us as African scholars begin to even contest him. Like, as I'm saying, he said it was a BULHOEK massacre. I am saying it is a BULHOEK moment, because on the basis that AmaXhosa were fighting, it was not like these church people who were waiting to be mowed down by the European and colonial security power. So that church and those people have then rebuilt themselves over the years. And I was saying in the beginning, they have been celebrating the 104th, not celebrating, commemorating the 104th, 105th anniversary of that. Every year they go and commemorate that without fail. Yeah. There are criticisms that are taking place, but the story of BULHOEK massacre did not happen and not affect people. I'm one of the faces. There are other faces. There are people that you can attach to the story of the BULHOEK massacre. And it is not a Eastern Cape story. It is a story of Africa. It is a story of the country. As I was saying that, I just realized now that there was a person who lost his life from Hampatlele. And when I asked the people from Hampatlele, do you know this? They'd be like, we might not have the record, but the fact that is in Mpatlele, that person is from Mpatlele.
Yes.
It makes a conclusive, it provides for a conclusive evidence. So I tried in my thinking to do these things together. Context, the actual, and the contestation.
Sure.
At a philosophical level, where were the contestations, and also on the physical, where were those? But then, my last point is, any other person that was seen to be bringing some kind of subversion after the BULHOEK massacre, they were harshly dealt with. Who is that? There was then a lady who was also a prophetess. She was called Nonteta.
Nonteta.
Yes.
Nonteta.
Yeah. So Mam Nonteta also emanate from that tradition of prophecies within the AmaXhosa speaking people in the Cape Colony. So the colonial government, what it did to Mgjima, it was like, let's deal with this thing and never allow the situation to happen. A few years later, there was then a prophetess by the name of Nonteta. And also she was organizing people breaking away from the European Christian dom that wants to define people within the prisms of European logic. You know what Europeans did, the colonial government? They arrested her and they remanded her in Vescopi's mental institution and accused her of being schizophrenic. And this person had a large number of following. All of those people who were following her, they were then reduced to say, no, you were led by a mad woman. That lady died here in Pretoria at Vescopis, and she was then buried at Rebecca Cemetery. And then it was many years later that again Robert Edgar helped the congregation to try to trace that person, and then she was then reburied at home in the Eastern Cape. But what I'm saying is that logic, that element of the BULHOEK massacre, when you look at it, it has got other implications. And majority of people, they would think that no, it was the church people, the people who were worshipping with the no. It was a serious contestation between the logic of Europeanism and the logic of Africans. Unfortunately, because of the firepower, Mgjima and AmaXhosa could not sustain that, and it ended up being that killing of those people in BULHOEK, which was then dubbed the BULHOEK massacre.
Thank you for a very rich one. So as you explained, I put on notes specifically just so I don't interrupt your thought. So one thing very interesting is you made this with many links, but you did not link it with the Mbabata rebellion, because this looks exactly like the repetition. So when the leader of Israel started, it was around 1900s, and at the beginning. So you think he lived and started rebelling at almost the same time as Mbambata. I'm always massacring Bambata every time I try to say it. So it was at the time where the government took a conscious decision, and this is where they started realizing that the 1913 Land Act had to come into effect to assist them, because they had a boy tax, a doi tax, a dog tax. They had a lot of taxes, of which our leaders said, no, this is not fair. I do not want to come and work at your farms. I don't want to come and work at your mines and your industries. I'm happy here. Why should I work for you? Because I've got my cows. I can eat when I want. I can go and in my own farm. So why must I work? And then they realize we have to make these people work. Let them pay taxes, and then it will deplete their resources. Then we started paying taxes. This is why he rebelled. And this is, I mean, I don't know if this was killed, but the rebellion started around 1906. So they had a practice run for Mgjima. Do you any correlations between the two?
One of the things that you must understand, again, because we are trying to talk with a specific occurrence of the BULHOEK massacre, so I had to place the others a little bit out of the way. But I can tell you that the 1900s
very contested
were a period of Africans contesting, and even the centuries before, Africans had constantly been contesting. And what happens is in the Cape Colony has happened in the Natal Colony. What happened in the Natal Colony have happened in Southwest Africa Colony and in other places. So all of these massacres, all of these things that are taking place, they are not isolated. That is why the colonial government, when we think of it, we should not think about the police from the Cape Colony. No, the colonial government. And when they release a person by Colonel Truda to go and lead the massacring in BULHOEK, he might have been also sent to another place because he had an experience of how to deal with these so-called subversions of Africans. So all of these things were interrelated. And Mgijima's moment, or Mgijima's coming into prominence, influenced some other people on the side, which was later called Transkei, to say, we're not going to pay. We're paying no taxes. Even Mgijima and his people were saying, we are paying no taxes. We are not going to pay anything. So it's not new. And all of these things are then linked to one another.
Yeah.
So the Bambata rebellion, it's a rebellion of Africans. The Mgjima rebellion is a rebellion of Africans. These people were not seen by the colonial logic as different. They were all non-humans. They were all Africans that must be dealt with in that situation.
The spy, the group of the spies who then considered themselves the negotiators, who were then sent to, you call it Ntabelanga?
Ntabelanga, yes.
Ntabelanga, to that shrine. Was it with John Tengo Jabavu of the ANC?
Yes, yes.
So even at the time, he was still considered a puppet of the system.
Some people would make that argument, but remember that the logic here is that you've got people who have been accepted to have been converts. So AmaXhosa are seen to be civilized. They are able to reason, and on the basis of that, it means they can go and reason with their other Africans. But Bona, because they can carry a particular reasoning from the white colonial rule. Ne? So there is that thinking of saying, he's a better black than these ones. So there was that thinking. But also at the same time, Mgjima had in Queenstown in 12, I think it was in 12 or something, but there was a meeting, a big meeting of the ANC, African Natives Nation Congress or something.
The AA.
Yeah, there was a meeting there. Mgjima sent them a correspondence and gave them a gift of a cow in that conference. And he did, but he said, I'm not going to be part of you. We might be fighting the same thing, but we are fighting it differently. So already logically, he did not see that approach as beneficial. Whether he saw it as a possible selling out moment or not, but he felt like we might be fighting the same thing. You are fighting it physically, I'm fighting it spiritually. Okay. So there is that. So many of these things must be understood to be linked. And unfortunately, historians tend to deal with things in isolation without linking them together.
If you said it, I missed it. But in my thinking, I've always associated the scripture, the Bible, as something that says, who are the children of God? They are Israelites, God's chosen people, God's chosen race. This is what the Bible says. And is there any particular reason why they were called Ama-Israeli? And Ushembe, I think I have a Shembe here. I think I've got an absolute Shembe here. They are also Israelites. Is it Nazarites or Israelites? I think Israelites. Nazarites.
Yeah, Nazarites.
Like all these names, what is the logic behind giving themselves these names? Are they mimicking the biblical stories? And I believe Ama-Israel are still called Ama-Israel, right?
Yes.
As we carry on. And we, the inland people, always find Israel very strange. I think they might be commonplace in the south coast. Maybe to a particular reason, maybe the same way people from the South Coast see the ZCC,
yes.
as something very strange, because South Africa is so big, people don't actually understand how big South Africa is, because these cultures are very different. These are Orthodox churches in South Africa that had blended with traditions. Why in particular is it? Because you see, the ZCC, the Zionists, and then unalima Zayoni, asima Zayoni, with different colored clothing, the St. John's and stuff, and in all corners of South Africa, there are big churches who call themselves with related to, they choose these things in the Bible. What particular reason do they have to call themselves Israelites?
This is, again, you would remember I had said to you, there was the original church. I'm saying original in inverted commas, because I don't have a correct vocabulary for it. It was then established in Americas by William Saunders Crowd. Now, William Saunders Crowd says when he establishes this, I'm bringing in the Ancient of Days. So I'm giving you the old kind religion, which we can draw it from the Mosaic Law, which Mosaic Law depicts that God had then established his own nation. Remember, there was no nation called Israelites up until there was a biblical selection of Jacob to become Israel, changing of name, and then all those offspring that came after him became the children of Israel, and therefore if they then grew up they became Israel. Now, so when he starts this church, he then says, we are the children of Israel at a spiritual level. So our spirituality, our law, all our living depicts from the logic of Israel, because Israel emanates from the God selecting and saying you must live in a certain way. So that's how he establishes this. Now, because he joins the church of that way of thinking, he then also says, instead, because I've been expelled by this church, which is this church, the mother church. So rather than to say, again, use the logic of the ANC, Jacob Zuma, he gets expelled, or whatever the case might be, and then instead of saying he's another organization, he says MK Party is the ANC, but it's the correct ANC, like something like that. So instead of breaking away from your foundation, you just choose a name that is within that organization. So that was the selection. The Nazarites, AmaXhosa can also be referred to as the Nazarites. Numbers 6, the book of Numbers 6, defines what a Nazarite is. A Nazarite is on the basis of a certain way of living, including the dietary things. So the things that you do for you to qualify to be a Nazarite.
This is where kosher comes
in.
So the kosher, so I have, and the reason I'm asking you is, so I have hosted AmaIsrael from the USA, the certain studio, and I'll avail that podcast. We did a very long podcast, 2 hours long podcast. And I've also hosted Valemba. They don't seem to agree on their biblical positioning, but what is clear amongst them as both Israelites, they believe, yes, the original Israelites are not white, they are African.
Yes.
And this is consistent with the biblical teachings that they have, and there is no way. And he takes me through a painstaking process of proving all of these things biblically, and he reads the Bible. He's got a narrator who reads the Bible throughout the podcast. Very, very interesting. You will enjoy it when you sit with it. So, we currently have a problem now in that part of the world with Caucasians coming from Europe, who then is a narrative that paints them as the originals. The word Jew, the word Israel, the word, all of these things are very contested. And just so, because we have said the word so many times, this podcast runs a risk of not being shown to other people. So, and so I would always ask people, when we speak about such, let's use vernacular words to speak around this, and it's very difficult because the audience may not be in that vernacular language. So it's a huge challenge. No, but so for as Africans, how we position each other around these words. These ones are Israelites, these ones are not, these ones are the black Jews. How do we navigate that?
I think we should understand it on at its foundational element, at a spiritual level, to say you are AmaXhosa in relation to your spiritual element. You are AmaXhosa in relation to that. Yes. You are Nazarenes in relation. You are not Nazarenes or Nazarites by geography.
You are that by practice.
By practice.
Okay.
Not by geography. And two, those ones that are
Balemba.
in Balemba, also, they are that by practice and spirituality. But
they claim by genealogy and biology.
Even they could say that because the selection of vocab, the words, words can be attached to a meaning. So they could say they are Balemba on the, and they are not Balemba, they are. But the issue of Israel and Israelite, you use it for a particular purpose. In Gaza now, those people under Netanyahu's government, they are Zionists, which have then located and established a society in a geographic place, and they called it Israel, because they want to justify the subjugation of the others. The same logic that was applied with colonial and colonialism in our country. Say, okay, you are a Christian. Ne? So if you are a Christian, by default, you must be a Christian that is like this. You can't be a Christian like Mgjima, who says, we are going to be Christian, but we're not paying tax. We're going to be Christians, but we're not going to be allowing your white supremacist approaches to define what it means to be Christian. We're going to be independent, but as an independent church, we're also drawing from your Christian dogmas, including our African indigenous approaches. So the problem of words tend to be attached to a particular meaning. You know, before the famous podcast, you could have said, no, I've got a podcast. What is that? What is it? What is it? No, sitting around the bushfire. There were no cameras, and we called it a podcast. But because the word was then attached to a particular meaning, then podcast is only meaning one thing. But I can tomorrow say, actually, I'm standing there by the road and I'm doing podcast. No, that is not podcast.
Correct.
You understand?
Correct. I follow you.
The letter Z. People will say, no, that is a letter Z. And if you say, no, it's W. And they, no, it can't be because it is Z. And you say, no, but according to me, it is W. The meaning of the word that we give to something, it does not make it what it is. So we can only attach a meaning to a word. So when you call yourself Israel, or as a Nazarene, or whatever you want to call yourself,
yes,
it is on the basis of what you do with it. That's why those ones are calling themselves Israelites against the Gaza people. But some of us will call them, no, you are not Israelites. You are actually Zionists. And we attach the word Zionist to a particular meaning, and also they attach the word Israelites to a particular meaning. So there are two meanings to those words that we're attaching. They attach Israel to a chosen nation. We attach Zionists to an oppressive, brutal, evil nation. So can you see the usage of those?
So let's do this. Let's do this in closing. Please recommend for us someone who's going to teach us about
No. Yes.
All right. Anyone that you can recommend for us?
There's a contest. By the way, my friend Dr. Klaas is one person who has brought in a contest around the historiography of non-housing.
Yes.
So I would recommend him, but also I would recommend that people begin to read and understand his logic around it. But also there are other people who continue to defend the old historiographical narrative of the story of non-housing.
Indeed, it was a false prophecy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think he brings in a very fresh perspective, and it allows us to maybe rethink what we have been consuming and what we have been taught.
Okay.
So Dr. Klaas would be my person.
Anyone who can help us with Bambata?
I think I've got there's a guy who's also my friend. He works with the Amafa Heritage in KwaZulu.
Okay.
You call it KwaZulu Natal.
Yes.
Yeah, but KwaZulu. So he works with AMAF. Maybe he's one other person, because I know that institute works a lot of history in that part of the world. Maybe that he can also be considered to give us, because they talk extensively about the kingdom of the Amazon.
Yes.
So surely there would be somebody who would be working.
And his loyal links.
Yes.
And why he gathered so much support, and why he was hunted down in Nkandla. Yeah, like all of those things.
Those become,
it's a very beautiful history of our people.
Those are become, and you would see how this entire thing,
and how his story became dwarfed. Was he betrayed? Is his history deliberately not being told because he's one of the first who stood up and say, because we need to hear stories like that.
Yeah,
because it's a real hero for our African people.
It is. So all of these people, all of these stories of Africans, the dwarfing of them had a particular objective of looking at yourself as a weak nation and a weak people.
Yes.
But you had people once in every moment who would then stand up on the side of the Africans. But also you had people on the side of the oppressor, who were Africans, who were then utilized their moments to sell out their own people. But the BULHOEK massacre story is a very interesting phenomenon, and it needs to be dug deep more, even beyond the actual moment, the day when people would want to talk about it as our people were massacred, and then if you do contest the state will be unleash its violence on you, and nobody talks about the implication of how these women who were then living in destitute began to rebuild their lives and raise the children, some of them, by the way, which is Dorata Man of the SACP. There's a lady of the SACP. She is a generation. She was born by a generation of
the
survivor of BULHOEK massacre. So she becomes very prominent in the fight against injustice and apartheid. And all of these people begin to rebuild themselves. In the 60s, you've got others who then join the Pan-Africanist Congress of Sobukwe, fighting against, who were born by survivors of the BULHOEK massacre, like your Gideon Troko and others. And in the 70s, those who got involved into the Black consciousness movement were born by people who were born by survivors of the BULHOEK massacre. And us, who are then contesting the neo-colonial expression and the neoliberal expression, we were born by those who were born by those who were born by those who survived the BULHOEK massacre. So you can see the link that the life of this thing, of anti-injustice and fighting against subjugation of the African people, it continues to manifest itself, even if we don't want to. I never wanted to speak the way that I speak, yes. But it manifests itself in the ways that it does.
Mashiane, politically incorrect has been a long one. One thing I can take down as a note is they took away our ancestors, but the idea still lives on, and I think it's incumbent on us to continue teaching the history, even if it's not nice. My brother, thanks for coming once again. Thanks for honoring your invite. Every time we call, you come.
Thank you.
Thank you. Peace.